Welcome to our topic for today, Math Practice 1, Making Sense of Problems and Persevere in Solving Them. The goals for today's class are that you would understand what's meant by problem solving, compare two perspectives of problem solving to apply learning and problem solving to advance learning. That you would know the characteristics of being a problem solver, and to become even more aware of the importance of struggle and perseverance when solving problems. Problem solving is not only at the center of mathematics, problem solving is mathematics. Before determining what problem solving is, let's consider what we mean by a problem. Think about this. What is a problem? What is a problem? According to Pisek, Philip, and others, a problem is any task or activity for which students have no prescribed or memorized method for solving. For example, when you were 3 years old, writing your name was probably a problem. Now it's routine. When you first were learning to drive a car, how to attend to the pedals, the steering wheel, the traffic signs, other drivers was a problem. If you drive a car now, most days, driving is more of a routine than a problem. Two perspectives of problem solving. In education today, there are two major approaches to problem solving. One approach views problem solving as a way for students to apply what they have already learned. Learn first, then apply what was learned to a problem-solving situation. A second approach views problem solving as a way for students to advance learning, for students to engage in problem solving as a way to learn through problem solving. You are probably familiar with the first approach. You were taught content and procedures and then were called on to apply that learning to a different situation. You may not be familiar with the second approach to problem solving. It's a constructivist approach to learning, also referred to as project-based learning, problem-based learning, and STEM-based learning. Think about these two different approaches to learning. In completing the probe for this lesson, you compared these two approaches to problem solving. Difference in purpose. In the probe, what differences did you consider between the two approaches to problem solving in terms of difference in purpose? The answer to this question is the difference between solving real problems and problem solving as the application of a pre-taught understanding or process. As this slide suggests, if learning were cupcakes, problem solving for application is like giving children pre-made cupcakes, letting them decide what to do with the cupcakes, but hoping that they will do the right thing, which is to eat the cupcakes with as little mess as possible. Whereas problem solving for advancing learning is giving children the opportunity to make their own cupcakes, giving guidance and support when necessary, but not taking the spoon out of their hands. Considering the two approaches, think about it. What is the difference in the teaching approach? How did you answer this question in the probe? Did you consider the following? Teaching to apply learning involves teachers in a do as I do approach, a do as I show you approach, an approach that focuses on memorizing, on learning a routine. Do as I show you approach is a narrow, one-way, correct way approach that may hold meaning for some children, but not for all children. In contrast, problem solving to advance learning is open to different approaches to solving a problem. The teacher uses the approach that best meets the needs at that moment to facilitate the child's construction of understanding. This means that the teaching approach we use differs depending on the needs of the child. Differentiated instruction is key when the purpose for problem solving is to advance student learning. The teacher's role when problem solving is to apply learning is I show it to everyone, everyone practices it, I test to see if you did what I showed you. The application approach usually involves the teaching of algorithms. Although the algorithm which is most efficient often depends on the country, especially important to realize when teaching children from other countries. Below are some algorithms for addition. We may think that the only algorithms or step-by-step procedures for doing calculations are the ones that we were taught. But other countries have different algorithms that they use to teach their children. Some countries add from left to right, the natural way that children add, adding the highest denominations first, like we do when we count money. Algorithms enter into the discussion when comparing problem solving to apply or problem solving to advance learning. Problem solving to apply is based on algorithms. Algorithms as a way or a process that's used to calculate answers, whereas problem solving to advance learning, algorithms are a down-the-line possibility process to show children only after they have already established meaning. And that's key. Only after they have already established meaning and have come up with their own processes for finding answers. Algorithms then can be shown to be shortcuts, not a you must do it my way requirement. This slide shows the results that I found after doing a quick Google search on algorithms. How many of these algorithms are you familiar with? The top two are those taught in China. The lattice is Hindu. The point is that there is not one way to calculate or find answers, and it's important to note that all of these ways appear strange when children first learn them, even the ways that are familiar to us. When children first learn them, to them, it seems strange. When children learn through problem solving, learners' initial informal strategies are just the beginning of instruction. As teachers, we support students' development into more formal and coherent strategies. To give a quick summary of the different purposes, problem solving to apply learning, students apply math after it was learned. They apply math to find the one correct answer, and they apply learning to become proficient in using an algorithm. In contrast, problem solving to advance learning, students construct new mathematical understanding as they are problem solving. They use problem solving to develop and extend conceptual understanding. And they use problem solving to gain number sense, to understand numbers. And to do a quick summary of the different teaching approaches, problem solving to apply learning, the approach is teachers use a do as I show you approach. Students plug in the approach. This is the approach that students were to have learned, for example, the algorithm taught by the teacher. In contrast, problem solving to advance learning, students figure out their own strategies and solutions. Students think about and try out a number of different approaches. They decide which make the most sense to them. Clue words. Classrooms often display lists of clue words, such as those found here for addition and subtraction. Take a little time to think about the following question. Does learning clue words increase or decrease students' quest for meaning? And why do you think this? Before moving on to the next slide, I encourage you to pause and consider these questions. Thinking about the clue words from the previous slide, consider the following problems. The key words or clues are in red. Problem number 1. Tara ate 7 cookies, which is 3 cookies more than Sarah ate. How many cookies did Sarah eat? Tim collects marbles. For his birthday, his sister gave him 4 more marbles. Now Tim has 10 marbles altogether. How many marbles did he have before his birthday? Problem 3. When Al and Sam combined their cars, they had 9 cars. If Al has 3 cars, how many cars does Sam have? As you work through these 3 problems, answer the question, do these clue words tell you to add or subtract? Does knowing keywords help to solve these word problems? Why or why not? The key words on the previous slide all had to do with addition, and yet all of the problems posed require subtraction. The slide says, clue words? Please don't. You may want to pause this PowerPoint presentation to read the article, 13 Rules That Expire, written by Karp in the journal Teaching Children Mathematics. Among other issues, the article addresses the problem with teaching students to look for clue words. I attached the article so you might read it to better understand her argument against unproductive, harmful practices such as teaching students to look for clue words. Also, you may want to check out the following blog. There's the URL there on the screen. I'd like to read from a part way down the page on that blog where the blogger Robbie writes the following. I have a personal experience to share. Several years ago, I went to my nieces and nephews' school to facilitate a mathematics lesson in each of their classes. My nephew's group of 4 were solving the problem, Max has 39 cupcakes, 17 are chocolate, and the rest are strawberry. How many strawberry cupcakes does Max have? He was so excited as he called me over to his group and told me that there were 22 strawberry cupcakes. I asked him how he knew that. One of the students in his group said, well, we subtracted to find out how many were strawberry. All of a sudden, my nephew said, oh no, we did it wrong. We're supposed to add. Not showing any emotion, I asked why he thought they should have added. He said, well, because it says in all, and it says right on that poster, pointing to the wall, that in all means to add. I thought I would cry. When the students were thinking about the actual problem and making sense of the content, they reasoned their way to a solution, the correct solution. Yet, when an operation was mentioned, they immediately gave up reason, and, in my translation, they thought, oh no, we're supposed to pay attention to all of the content. It will confuse us. We need to use that helpful chart with the clue words that will help us to always get the right answer. Robbie's bottom line, clue words, don't. Different contexts or situations. This is connected to what you did in the probe MAP1-2. In that probe you completed for this topic, what did you think the differences were in the context or situation for problem solving to apply learning as opposed to problem solving to advance learning? Do you still think the same thing, or has your thinking changed? I encourage you to think about what you wrote in the probe and to either add to the evidence to support your initial thoughts or consider those thoughts in the light of new learning. Different context situations. In probe MAP1-2, you wrote that you thought there were differences between problem solving to apply learning and problem solving to advance learning. What context or situation differences did you notice? In light of what you now understand, has your thinking changed? Not all problems are appropriate. On this slide, I give 5 criteria that we can use to determine the quality of a problem. We might ask, will this problem interest students? Does it call for meaningful mathematics? Is the problem at the appropriate grade level? Is it challenging enough and open-ended enough for all students? Does it support the use of multiple strategies? We will talk about these individually in the next slides. So, when considering a problem, one of the first criteria we need to ask is, will it interest students? Is the situation something that students will care about? Something they've heard about? Listen to what students are talking about, what students play with, what they pretend in their play. For example, Bennett comes in wearing a new pair of shoes. He keeps looking at the shoes and touching them. And the math topic for today is measurement. What might be an interesting problem context for a measurement problem? All right, here's an example. The problem could be Bennett wants to know 3 different ways to measure his shoes. How will you tell Bennett that he can measure his shoes? Compare the measurement of Bennett's shoes to your shoes. This problem would be of interest to students. And this would give the problem an opportunity for your students to be the stars, to be an important person whose interests and lives are noticed and honored in your classroom. The second question to ask is, does it call for meaningful mathematics? Let's look again at the Bennett shoe problem. Does this problem call for meaningful math? Think for a few seconds. What is the meaningful math found in the shoe problem? Now, though it depends on the grade level, and though you haven't analyzed the standards at this point in the course, I'm going to just give you a brief overview. For pre-K to K, the meaningful math could be a study of attributes. The attributes are exactly what is being measured. This is important and foundational math concept for measuring. Moving to grade 1, the meaningful math might be ordering and comparing lengths, measuring lengths indirectly, and by iterating, which simply means moving whatever you're measuring with. For grade 2, the meaningful math could be learning to measure using rulers, measuring in different units. So to determine if the problem has meaningful mathematics, we want to check the standards to see if the math for the problem can align with the math found in the standards for that particular grade level. So, will the problem interest students? Does it call for meaningful mathematics? The next question to ask of a problem is the problem at the appropriate grade level? Is the shoe problem at the appropriate grade level? Why do you think this? Now, the shoe problem would be too complicated if pre-K to grade 1 students were asked to use a ruler, or if grade 2 students were required to express length as whole numbers and fractions. So check the numbers used in the problem. For example, reading and writing numbers in pre-K, the numbers in the problem should only go up to 20, whereas reading and writing numbers in grade 1, the problem can go up to the number 100. So check the problem that the required parts of the problem are at the grade level. The next question we want to ask of a problem is it challenging enough and open-ended enough for all students? Is the shoe problem challenging enough for all students? Why do you think this? Is it open-ended enough? Why do you think this? The shoe problem meets the criteria of being challenging enough and open-ended enough for all students. Some students may not immediately know what measure means, while others can be challenged by different types of measurement, different non-traditional units. For example, some might measure length using chain links. Some might use paper clips. Some might measure how many gummy bears long their shoes are. Some students might measure in traditional units, in inches or centimeters. Some might be ready to consider fractional parts of units, might try estimating, might make comparisons. When you unpack the measurement standards, which you will do later in this course, you will become more aware of the breadth of challenges inherent in an open-ended problem, such as the shoe problem. The shoe problem is also open-ended because each student will decide the attribute he or she wants to measure. Do they want to measure the length, the width, the height, or even the weight of the shoes? Will they decide the measurement tool to use? And they will decide how that tool is going to be used. Are they going to measure whole units, parts of units? Will they measure to the nearest unit? Will they make approximations, estimates? The shoe problem is open-ended enough for all students to advance in their learning, from the lowest performing student to the highest. As they work through the problem, each of them can advance in learning. Let's read through this list of criteria one more time and then talk about the last one. Number 1, will the problem interest students? 2, does it call for meaningful mathematics? 3, is the problem at the appropriate grade level? 4, is it challenging enough and open-ended enough for all students? And lastly, does it support the use of multiple strategies? Think about it. Is the shoe problem challenging enough for all students? And why do you think this? The shoe problem invites the use of multiple strategies. Students might directly measure the length or the weight of the shoe by holding a ruler or chain links against the shoe, or they might put the shoe on a scale to measure the weight. The unit of measurement could be moved along the shoe, or the shoe could be held up to see how it measures against, say, a yardstick that's nailed to the wall. Bennett's shoe problem might be compared to, in Bennett's shoe problem, students might compare the length of Bennett's shoe to other children's shoes, to the teacher's shoes, by putting their shoes side by side, or they might measure separately and then compare numbers, which is greater than, less than. And now the shoe problem passes the tests of being interesting, focused on meaningful math, is at the appropriate grade level or can be made such, is challenging and open-ended enough for all students, and it supports the use of multiple learning strategies. A little bit of review. 2 perspectives on problem solving. So far, we have compared the 2 approaches to problem solving in terms of purpose, in teaching approach, and in context or situation. Next, we will compare the types of questions that teachers ask if their approach to problem solving is an application of learning or if it's the advancement of learning. In the probe for this topic, what different questions did you suggest teachers might ask? Before moving on to the next slide, I encourage you to take a few moments to think about how the types of questions might differ for these 2 different approaches to problem solving. Let's read the slide to see the different types of questions, and as we do, see if you can determine the major differences between these types of questions. So if we're asking questions, when the problem solving is for the reason of applying learning, the teachers will ask questions that call on students to give a correct answer and correct approach. For example, the teacher might ask, what is the answer to number 4 or whatever? What steps did you follow to get your answer? In contrast, if problem solving is to advance learning, teachers may ask questions that call on students to verify and make connections. They would ask questions such as, why do you think your answer makes sense? How can both your answer and, for example, Sam's answer be right? How can you use a similar problem to help solve this problem? Look over these questions. What do you see as the major difference between these types of questions? Again, looking at this same slide about different types of questions, did you note that questions that are asked for application are what questions? Questions that expect correct answers and the following of routine steps. These are yes, no, right, wrong questions that ignore that learning is a developmental process towards building meaning. These questions focus on correctness. In contrast, did you notice that advancement questions are why and how questions? These questions probe for verification and critical thinking and making connections. These questions suggest that learning is a developmental process toward meaning building. The differences between these types of questions might be stated as correctness versus growth, or end of the line versus progress. Let's look at this slide again of the two perspectives of problem solving. We have compared problem solving to apply learning and to advance learning in 4 different ways. We've talked about differences of purpose, differences of teaching approach, differences of context and situations, differences in questioning. Finally, we will compare these two perspectives looking at differences in assessment goals. I encourage you to think again about the differences in assessment goals. Again, recall what you wrote in the probe. What might you add to your initial response for the difference between assessments? The goals when assessing for application of learning are different than the goals when assessing for the advancement of learning. Let me read these differences and you compare and maybe add to what you were thinking. Also, as I read, see if you can generalize the major differences between these assessment goals. When the purpose for problem solving is that students would apply learning, the assessment goals are to get the right answer, to mark for incorrect or correct, to follow the correct procedure, and you might give partial credit for following a part of the correct procedure. You might have students redo items that are wrong. In contrast, when the purpose for problem solving is to advance learning, the assessment goals are to make understanding visible. The teacher would examine student work to determine what they do and do not understand. They would listen to determine the in-the-moment feedback to give to students or to extend their thinking. To make dispositions and thinking visible, they would listen to students' responses and read students' body language to give targeted feedback, to commend growth, and to scaffold strategies, thinking, and making of connections. Now, how would you generalize these differences? I would say that the differences are the difference between summative and formative assessment. When assessing students' application of what was to have been already learned, the goals are summative. In other words, did you learn what you should have learned? And the assessment is to determine a mark to put in a grade book, a final decision on what students learned. In contrast, when assessing students' advancement in learning, the assessment is formative. We assess to determine what students know thus far, to determine how far students have advanced in their learning. Have they advanced to the mastery level? If not, what do they need to know that they could progress through the learning and learn through problem solving? We assess to figure out if students need support, and if they do, what kind of support they need. If the formative assessment shows that students have developed conceptual understanding to the extent that they are able to transfer that understanding to other situations, we can take that formative assessment and make it summative. When students have advanced to the mastery level in their learning, we turn the formative assessment into a summative mark in our grade book, and we move on to another topic. Students become problem solvers When problem solving is used to advance student learning, students become problem solvers. They become mathematical thinkers. Before each move, Cohen analyzed the blocks in the Jenga tower. He tested different pieces to find the one that was loose. He used reasoning to maintain the balance of forces acting on and through the Jenga blocks, looking for the piece that was not integral to maintain that balance. Did 5-year-old Cohen know the words balanced forces and testing pieces? No, but he showed that he understands spatial concepts. He didn't simply pull out a random piece. He carefully analyzed and reasoned through every move. Do you know what mathematical thinkers do? They analyze problems. They reason about problems. They build arguments that support solutions. Cohen didn't verbalize his arguments. So this is where the teacher would lend support by asking questions like, why did you choose that block rather than this other block? What did you think would have happened if you pulled this piece? Why do you think this? Mathematical thinkers connect solutions to everyday life. This is another connection the teacher would consider. What task might I give Cohen to see if he can transfer what he learned? You might, for example, have Cohen build a bridge using Jenga blocks. Mathematical thinkers use the right tools at the right time. Before removing a block, Cohen used his index finger as a tool to test if the piece was loose. Mathematical thinkers are precise in communicating their understanding. The teacher can support the student on this while the problem solving is taking place. Teaching Cohen vocabulary with which to communicate his thinking, the teacher might introduce words like load, shift, force, gravity, tension. As Cohen is problem solving, the teacher might say, I see now that you removed that block and the load on the top is still supported by these beams. Or the teacher might say, the center of gravity appears to be along here. Or, yes, the structure is still stable. You kept the balance between forces. And you might say, oh no, you removed a block from the load-bearing wall, and gravity pulled the blocks down. So in the midst of problem solving, the teacher sees what the student needs to understand and supports the student in that understanding. Mathematical thinkers also use patterns and structures that are regular and that repeat. Cohen used structural understanding as he considered the components of the whole, the individual blocks in relation to the whole tower, and he generalized and repeated moves that made sense and that gave the results that he was seeking. The characteristics of mathematical thinkers are expressed in the CCSSM as mathematical practices. We will continue to explore these practices in the upcoming coursework. We've been talking about mathematical practices, and in particular, mathematical practice number 1. And I think this would be a good place to interject how important it is that students would struggle to learn. Brain research confirms that the greatest learning takes place when we struggle to make sense of problems. Brain plasticity is the term that brain scientists use to refer to the incredible capacity of the brain to grow and change. When we struggle to learn, the synaptic or electrical current in our brains increase, making us smarter. The illustration on the far left and the top of the slide select that the synaptic activity takes place in the brain when we engage in deep thinking. Note the diagrams on the brain, how passive learning sparks some synaptic activity, while activity brain sparks many more times, and neurons are sparking and electrical energy are brought on by active engagement, such as struggling to solve problems. Well, what if during problem solving, students become emotional? During the Jenga challenge, Cohen was successful many times and in many ways, even though his tower did eventually fall. But what about those students whose attempts are unsuccessful? What about those students who become overwhelmed and rather than persisting in problem solving, they give up or respond in some negative, unproductive way? Sodders and Hall wrote a book called Fostering Resilient Learners. And in that book, they give strategies for dealing with negativity students may respond with. The first advice is that we teachers become self-aware. Look at each child on this slide. Which causes you the greatest emotional reaction? These are our triggers. We want to become aware of the triggers that cause us to either respond in kind or cause us to do something to either avoid or stop children's negative responses. We might respond by dumbing down the problem. We might lash out verbally. We might leave the child to work out the emotion on their own. Or any other number of reactions might make us abandon our primary responsibility, which is to promote student learning. I've had negative responses to students where all I wanted to do was make peace, and if that meant removing the struggle, I gave in. I've since changed my tactics on that. Just becoming aware of my triggers helped me to think through how I might respond in a positive way in that space between when I feel the trigger and I respond. This has helped me to remain grounded and to keep focused on the goal, student learning. According to Sowers and Hall, the next step is to breathe. Just breathe. Or as the Buddhist proverb states, your breathing is your greatest friend. Return to it in all your troubles, and you will find comfort and guidance. Breathing helps us to push the pause button and regain self-control. Then we can ask the emotional student to take a breath too, and then tell us why they are feeling upset. Listen to what they say. Do they need reassurance? Do they need praise for trying to think deeply? Do they need to know that making mistakes is how to learn? Do we need to remind them that they are like the successful people in the world? More successful people make more mistakes. Do we remind them of the favorite mistakes that they made in the past and how they worked through those? Do they need to be asked what this problem reminds them of? Do they need to be reassured that making mistakes and working through not knowing is powerful and important? Do they need to know that we are proud of them and that we value mistakes and we thank them for those mistakes? Respond to students' emotional reactions. The following strategies are from the book I referred to earlier, Fostering Resilient Learners. If you wish to do a study of this topic, this might be a good place to start. So, become aware of your triggers. Pause a moment to breathe, which helps us to push the pause button and to think through what steps to take next. Listen deeply. Refrain from protecting students from struggle, realizing that in doing so, if we're to protect them from struggle and rescue them, we cheat them out of the deep learning that they can gain from that struggle. Listen to know how to support the child while still allowing the child to struggle. Reassure the child that struggles and making mistakes are important for learning. Respond according to what the child may need to help them to connect to what they know and to move forward from there. Later, when the storm has passed, teach children the skills they need for coping with stress. Congratulate the student for working through their emotional upset. Help them to articulate what they did and how that helped. On the next slide is a comment from a classroom teacher who figured out, quite by accident, one way to help students. When students make a mistake, she turns the mistake and that frustration into a learning opportunity by highlighting mistakes. As I said in the last slide, we're going to take a look at what one teacher said when she talked about highlighting mistakes. This quote is from a teacher's blog, and I quote, I thought I had a good grasp of what this mathematical practice is meant, and I had strategies to help realize this practice in my classroom. What I didn't do was to use students' mistakes as a learning opportunity. That changed the day one of my students volunteered to give her answers, but came across a snag in her thinking. She was frustrated and about to stop when I said, "Wow, Trinity, thank you for making that mistake and bringing it to our attention. We can all learn so much from this." Trinity lit up with pleasure, and I saw the power in highlighting students' mistakes. She and the rest of the class felt positive. Since then, my students are proud of their good mistakes and are more willing than ever to dissect mistakes to discover where and why they went wrong. As a result, students are sticking to their problems longer, and we're really trying to find solutions. And they're learning great math along the way. This was a long presentation, and yet very foundational to what we're going to be doing for the rest of this course. You may want to listen to the MP3 when you're jogging or when you're driving in the car, or you may want to go through these slides again before you begin to transfer your learning. So the question is, what did you learn from this presentation? And I'm looking forward to finding out from your submission of MP1-3, Transfer, Making Sense of Problems, and Persevering. If you have questions about MP1 or about the submission, please don't hesitate to ask those questions in the Q&A forum. We will revisit Mathematical Practice 1 throughout the course as we continue to discuss the changes that were brought about to education from research and from the CCSSM. And these view math as thinking, problem solving, and meaning making. The next set of PowerPoint slides will present the second mathematical practice. That practice deals specifically with reasoning. What does it mean to reason abstractly and reason quantitatively? You are going to have to wait until the next presentation for answers to those questions. In the meantime, submit probe 2-1, the probe on reasoning. Download the document and follow the instructions found therein.